Kia ora and welcome to this conversation with Shanika Somatilake, who is, well, I know her as a cartoonist, a renowned cartoonist based in Auckland, New Zealand. Shanika, for me, has been for many, many years depicting through her artistic prowess the political, social developments in Sri Lanka. You've published, Shanika, in many, many online and print journals and newspapers as well. Now, in that introduction, have I done any violence to what you are doing or not doing?
No, I believe you've pretty much summed it up. Yeah, I've been pretty at it for a few years now, and I mainly online, and in some local papers too. But that got a bit muffled when the new government came through.
And by local, you mean Sri Lanka, not
yes,
New Zealand. Yes,
indeed.
Shanika is also a singer, which we will not be talking about today. But I did want to kind of touch base with you, Shanika. As we talked about off camera, I think it's something special going on back home in Sri Lanka. And I certainly haven't seen as much coverage as I would have liked in Aotearoa, New Zealand, about what is going on, why, and what it portends for the future. So I thought I'll touch base with you. You know this country more than I do. And I thought that we'll have a conversation so that we could pitch and promote what is actually a interesting situation and some developments back home to Kiwis who might not know that it's actually quite cool. And it's a unique thing that's going on. Anything that you wanted to kind of add to that?
So I basically, I'll just get to, I think, what gave rise to the protests. Now, so in 2019, when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa came into power, he had executive powers, 2/3 majority in parliament, and his promise to the people was that he was going to have this team of professionals on board to implement various programs across the sectors which would boost the economy and make up for years of economic mismanagement in the country. And also he promised to secure national security, which was a top priority for him and the majority Sinhalese, and justice following the Easter attacks, but he failed to keep his promises. So there's a whole lot of factors, and I believe that's what contributed to bring about these protests.
So just so that Kiwis understand, Gotabaya is the brother of the former president, and the former president had several terms in office.
Absolutely.
And so can you give us a sense of the history of the man who is currently president, which might help Kiwis understand and better appreciate the nature of the man, because he is quite unlike, I suppose, your average Kiwi politician.
Yes, so how this whole long story short, the Rajapaksa brothers have previously been in power, so they're largely credited for ending the civil war back in 2009 by the Sinhalese majority, despite having committed numerous human rights violations against the Tamils under their leadership. There's ongoing struggles in bringing accountability and justice for the Tamil community up north. Many members of the Rajapaksa family occupied senior positions in governments and various institutions across the country. But with that also, they committed large-scale corruption, accused of nepotism, bad governance, dictatorship, and so forth. And that's how they lost the 2015 elections, and Maithripala Sirisena came on board.
Right. Now, how can we tie what's going on today and recently with the question that might be asked, why now, why not before?
Well, I think the main their main problems are economic. That's what the main problem is. But we got to keep in mind that this is an unprecedented crisis, both economically and politically. And, you know, we've seen a bit of political instability in recent years when there was a coup back in 2018. President Maithripala Sirisena back then had a political fallout with then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe and appointed Mahinda Rajapaksa as the Prime Minister. So there was a period of time where two concurrent Prime Ministers, you know, were in government, and ultimately Prime Minister Wickremesinghe was reinstated, but there wasn't a humanitarian crisis like we're seeing today. We're talking about pre-COVID times, and people weren't having to line up for essentials back then. So I think this is mainly driven. This is driven by the, you know, the shortages of petrol, food, milk powder, medicine, electricity. Absolutely. So this is largely economic issues that we're dealing with today. That's what's driving these protests.
Shanika, I mean, my domain is slightly different to yours. I've never seen anything like this. I started studying social media on the 26th of January, 2010. And I know that date because that was the date of the presidential election that year, the first after the war. And that was the time when Sarath Fonseca and Mahinda Rajapaksa, the two leading candidates at the time, started using social media for the first time in electoral history. And I've been studying it since then, fairly frequently. And I've never seen anything remotely approximating what is happening, even just yesterday at the time of recording, which was the 9th of April. We're recording this on the 10th. And then the week before, and maybe the month or so before that. We can talk about it a bit more, but it's certainly unprecedented insofar as my domain goes. You, though, I mean, I appreciate your gaze, because you're looking at so much more, right? You're looking at a lot of issues. You're looking at it horizontally, laterally, and you're connecting a lot of dots. Have you, I mean, apart from the 2018 constitutional coup or crisis, have you seen anything in the years that you've been drawing and depicting the country and politically critiquing it close to what we are seeing today?
Absolutely not. These are unprecedented times. And I think, you know, we had a global economic crisis, and that too contributed to what Sri Lanka is going through currently. It's more like it's a whole lot of factors just came together and just it was a very unfortunate situation, you know, where there's a mismanagement of the economic situation in Sri Lanka. We have monumental debts, you know, the COVID handling, you know, it's a whole lot of factors that have contributed to this crisis. So I think this was just the tip of, you know, so we're looking at something that we've never seen before. So,
well, and because of that, I mean, I follow this as well, or try to, as much as one can. What to you are the key messages of the current protest movement? Because for Kiwis also, they don't speak our languages. And it might be the fact that they only latch on to what's in English. And I can tell you straight up that in my domain on social media, what's in English isn't the movement, isn't the protest. It never has been really indicative of anything talked about or flagged or framed in social media, because it's in Sinhala and Tamil. What to you what are you picking up? What can you tell Kiwis are the leitmotifs, the key messages in the protest movement?
I think the main message in the protest is for the president, Gotabaya, to resign and his government to go home. So that's the main message. And people just really have been, you know, asking for change for so many years, but they haven't actually pushed themselves enough to come to this point where they're actually out there on the streets, on the roads, protesting day and night. You know, we've seen people, you know, in the wee hours, they're protesting outside the presidential secretariat, and it's just unprecedented situation at the moment. I think the only way that this will resolve is for the president to step down. And that's the only way that these protests will ease, at least, temporarily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, there's been some, there's been an article, there's been some coverage on the telly. What more do you think that Kiwis should know about the moment, the movement? What is present on the ground? What's the feeling that you're getting that you would like Kiwis to know? Because the danger always is, and I'm sure, Shanika, you know this, like, you compare it to other protests that you've seen in elsewhere in the world.
Yeah.
And you tend to kind of see it through that lens, which might take away from the significance of what's going on from a Sri Lankan perspective.
Yeah.
So in relation to what may trigger in the Kiwi mind other protests from elsewhere and in the past. And by the way, I mean, in addition to what we saw over February in front of the Beehive, right? I mean, the protest vocabulary, I think, is raw and new here too. So what distinguishes our ground condition from whatever has been covered to date in the Kiwi media?
I think this is not any political party or a certain ethnicity that's protesting out there. I think the people have really come together for this because everyone is suffering. Previously, we see the government being condemned for handling the economic crisis here in New Zealand by the large Sinhalese community. But we're not talking about how this crisis worsened under the Rajapaksa regime. It's practically we're going back to that 2009 era where we have a militarized dictatorship running the country, and the people aren't happy, and the people have realized that they've made a huge mistake by electing Gotabaya, and they are trying to correct that mistake by actually telling him to go home. So, and also, following the Easter attacks, despite their bad track record, Rajapaksa's record, we saw the Rajapaksas get re-elected by the Sinhalese community in hopes of strengthening the Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, heightening national security and hoping for justice for Easter attack victims. But prior to the presidential elections, we saw them how ethnic tensions were being created in the country between the Sinhalese and Muslims, and after gaining power, they have increased militarization in the northern parts of Sri Lanka, and even after 3 years in power, they have failed to find the mastermind behind the church attacks. And I believe that's one of the initial key factors which drove Gotabaya's popularity to the ground. And most of us, including yourself, Sanjana, who have had their finger on the pulse, of the current events in Sri Lanka, saw this coming through how the Sri Lankan government handled the justice for war crimes in the north, the COVID crisis, the racist policies they implemented, which deeply affected the Muslim community, and various other political stunts to distract the public discourse from this massive borrowing of loans, looming economic crisis. They refused to go to IMF to seek financial help, the illegal detaining of lawyers, journalists. Most of us saw this mishandling of the economy and bad governance under the Rajapaksa much earlier. But I believe most of us here in New Zealand weren't pushed enough to raise concerns about human rights until now. So that's what I'm seeing a difference here. There's a bit of a double standard here, where we had a human rights crisis in Sri Lanka before. But now we're actually seeing people coming out and saying, hey, there's something seriously going on. That's, this is not right. And we need to make this, make correction to this and move forward. So it is a very positive sign, and I believe there's a blessing in disguise what's happening in Sri Lanka.
I feel so too. I hope it continues in the way in the way that it has evolved to date. One never knows. But that that also is a segue to my next question. You kind of answered it. The clarion call from the protests is for the president to resign. And some people want him to go home, metaphorically speaking, about the fact that he should just leave. Others, though, Shanika, I think you'll realize as well, they want to hold him accountable,
Absolutely.
For what he's done to the country. More around corruption, though, than around accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity is my reading of it. Will the end of the protests, should he leave, and one hopes soon, be the end of Sri Lanka's crises too, though?
I believe the current protests will end when Gotabaya resigns, but we have to keep in mind that the successive government, who'll come next, will inherit this crisis. And there's a lot of work to be done in terms of constitutional reforms, scraping out the executive presidency, which gave him those executive powers in the first place, and made him a sort of a dictator. Economic reforms, bringing in tougher laws for corruption and accountability and so forth to put Sri Lanka on the right track. So it'll take some time, and the people will have to be aware and be prepared for that.
One of the things actually that's happened is that, as you know, they want to get rid of the office of the executive president, not just the incumbent. So that's also quite new. Have you seen anything comparable? It's not, the Kiwis should know that this promise to get rid of this office is not new. And it's been dangled in front of us at every election.
Well, that is the thing. We see these promises coming through prior to elections, and when the leaders come on board, the president gets elected, they somehow sort of want to stay in that executive position, and they don't want to abolish the executive presidency. So this is I believe these protests are some of the people in the protests, they want all 225 MPs gone from the parliament. So that's a different thing. But this is it's years and years of gathered frustrations, and people have just reached breaking point, and people are not going to tolerate anymore. And I feel like this is really a good place for us, for Sri Lankans, to establish a stronger democracy and to get things right, in terms of accountability and tougher laws and things like that.
One of the things I keep getting asked is, with the situation in Ukraine, with anything really, it's a lot to do with the starting point that Aotearoa is geographically very removed from the rest of the world. And then what builds on that, which is the notion that one is immunized or inoculated against all that is going wrong in the rest of the world. Now, I don't want to get into that, because my domain very clearly is showing that that's not true and will not be true. But I suppose I asked that in that way to ask you the question I wanted to, which is, why should any of this matter to Kiwis here? Why should they care about an island which they might not even know quite to point out on a map? I don't know. You tell me.
It actually, I can say that it matters because it sends a strong message. This little island of Sri Lanka is sending a strong message currently to the world about the power of the people, right? And when the government fails to listen to the people repeatedly, tries to silence them through the use of force without offering sustainable solutions to their issues, they fight back. And, you can't blame them. They fight back. They are fighting for their survival. They're fighting for their children, and they're fighting for their future. So we saw social media blocked for a few days in Sri Lanka, use of military to intimidate, to silence people. And despite all that, the people of Sri Lanka are putting on a monumental effort to be heard. And they want the president gone and held accountable. So that's the main message. The power of the people, it's stronger than ever before in that country.
And you know what? Despite my greatest fear, which is that it will spill over into violence, which you can't rule out, I have been extraordinarily, pleasantly surprised that it hasn't. And I don't know, I mean, like, did you, like the scenes from the 9th in Golface, which is a promenade in Colombo, a very large breathing area, space that for decades, generations has been, for all of us in Colombo, a place that we could go out and have picnics and walk our dog, or just walk and get some fresh air. I mean, the signs, the slogans, the chants, the music, the baila, the diversity, it was extraordinary. I mean, because you've been in this country for longer, what would you compare that atmosphere to? I mean, for me, it would be, I mean, I think it would be like a carnival, really. But is there anything that you can connect it to give Kiwis a sense of what it was like at the zenith of the protests that we've seen to date?
I think there's a culture about the Sri Lankan culture of taking it easy and just enjoying the moment, as well as focusing on one big goal, and that is to send the government ask the government to step down. People want to keep it cool. People know the risks out there. People know what they're facing. We have the military out there. We have the police, and they have got network jammers, which jams internet so that you can't live stream in the middle of a protest. So people understand and know what lies for them if something happens. So they're all keeping their cool, and we're all connected through online, and we're monitoring the situation closely. And I think that makes a huge difference. When there is this, even the slightest start of a bonfire, people put it out on the web and say, hey, look, there's a fire happening right now, and there's something needs to be done, otherwise we all gonna get hosed down or taken to the police. So people are keeping a close watch, both online and on the ground, and just really, it's amazing. The coordination, the organizational skills, they're just amazing. People have come together in an amazing way.
But to also explain to Kiwis that this is not a political party-led or civil society in the sense of a non-governmental organization or any one collective or any one network or any one individual or any one location. It really is. I mean, Shanika, I was thinking about Zuccotti Park in New York, where they're just completely horizontal. The spread of the messaging, the organic nature of it, the demographic diversity, the geographic dispersion, in a sense. I think Kiwis should know that. I mean, it's new to us. And it's extraordinary to see.
Absolutely. And I just feel like people just have come together in an amazing way to focus on one goal. And I don't think I've ever seen something like that before, ever. I mean, in any country. But to be honest, we might have seen some sort of similar thing happening in America, when Trump, with the elections and all that in the US. But to see something like this in Sri Lanka is just unbelievable.
It's quite extraordinary. Now, how can Kiwis help? Because one thing we haven't talked about, and that's trending at the moment, is there is a growing humanitarian, I would like to call it crisis, but it's really a cataclysmic catastrophe. We are running out of essentials in hospitals, babies, and I don't want, this is not being dramatic, babies may not survive. We are running out of things to keep them safe. We're running out of essential medicines. And this is now reaching a bit of a boiling point, because we saw, I'm sure you have as well, I mean, it was first from the east and the north and other places, and now it's actually more island-wide, and it's also coming right into the heart of the Western province in Colombo as well. Yeah. So I think the protests and the political is taking a lot of our attention, but there's actually a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding at pace. How can Kiwis help?
I think apart from the immediate financial relief we can provide for those deeply affected by the crisis, with the help of New Zealand government, maybe we can put together a few sustainable relief initiatives to help Sri Lanka come out of this crisis. You know, that might be beneficial. You know, there is a shortage of milk powder. Yep. In Sri Lanka, and as you know, a lot of young infants, they rely on milk powder in Sri Lanka. For those who do not have access to a fridge, they rely on milk powder daily to get their nutrition. So I think in terms of, you know, giving aid, sustainable initiatives would be the way to go. But most importantly, as a Sri Lankan Kiwi, you know, I'd like to request the New Zealand government to closely monitor the ground situation in Sri Lanka, keep informed through non-government organisations, and apply pressure for them to respect the people's mandate. And, you know, the Constitution needs to be upheld, and human rights needs to be protected. So, you know, as it stands, Gotabaya must resign so that people can get back to their jobs, you know, can go on about their lives without having to, you know, worry about this this crisis, you know, worsening under the Rajapaksa regime.
It is horrible to think. I mean, yeah, but I just want to leave Kiwis with the impression that this is not your opinion or my opinion. Yeah. It quite literally is the clarion call to a degree, and with a unity of purpose that I think you and I have never seen before and never thought would ever occur either, that the president must resign and go.
Absolutely. Along with his brothers.
Along with the whole
family
of the whole family.
And I don't think they will ever want them back either. I mean, looking at the protests and looking at the slogans, looking at the chanting, I don't think the Rajapaksas would be wanted again.
You know, when I look at my data, Shanika, I don't think that the Rajapaksas understand the public sentiment. And I mean that genuinely, because here is a family that has always engineered unrest, that has always been the architects of violence, that have always been the progenitors of social communal division. And so for the first time in your life, literally and metaphorically, you are now confronted with a greater volume and pushback that you can't comprehend and you don't know. And I tweeted saying that I'm actually quite worried, you know, in my more charitable mood, because of the inanity of the family in responding to the protests, even just before yesterday, were incensed. You know, they were angering more the people, because you just had a complete disconnect from a basic humanity to understand the suffering of the people with what they were saying. And I was worried that there would be lynch mobs as a consequence.
Well, the truth is, Sanjana, this I mean, the Sinhala community had a different perspective of who the Rajapaksas were and what they did. But for those who actually were aware of the more wider, the background behind them, and, you know, we knew that they were not the kind of people who, you know, reach out and respect people's, human rights or anything like that. I mean, we could see that in the north,
and the Tamils and the Muslims would know that quite well, I think.
Absolutely. So we actually knew the type of politicians we're dealing with, and this is why I was so against them coming on board back in 2000 and we had the elections 2019.
And the presidential in 2019.
I knew this was going to be one of it's going to be a difficult one. So we knew about them, and I think the Sinhala community did know about them at the back of their mind, but they wanted them to come back to power following the Easter attacks, following the bad governance from Yahapalana era, and they wanted to their priority was national security. After the bombs, they wanted this whole thing secured, and so that's what they wanted. But they didn't actually think about the other aspect, which is, what if that gun that's pointing towards north, what if it points at me, who's in the south? And that's where they went wrong. They really underestimated the militarization and the dictatorship that these people were capable.
And just to also tell Kiwis, I mean, this is not hypothetical. On the 6th of April, we saw paramilitaries, coming to Parliament, in front of Parliament, where they were peacefully protesting, armed paramilitaries, and you had the police trying to diffuse the situation and take the keys off. It's extraordinary. I mean, the police against armed paramilitaries, and then the army commander saying that the police have to investigate the police for diffusing the situation against the armed paramilitaries. So just to give a sense of how volatile in a way things are, I suppose, for many Kiwis, but as you say quite rightly, for those of us who have been studying it, and may I just say that those of us who have been living it, I mean, you and I are lucky, we study it. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the north and the east who have been and are, as we know, suffering the consequences of militarization. And for decades.
It's a daily life for them. I mean,
it's a negotiation of violence.
This may be new to the southern parts of Sri Lanka, but this has been happening almost every day up in north, and that's what people are trying. People are in denial, but it is the truth, Sanjana. We have to accept what we're dealing with here, and this is a militarized dictatorship, and they want to be in power and use any means necessary to be in power.
I endorse that, and I think the New Zealand government should take that into consideration around any kind of diplomatic engagement with the country. Leave aside, of course, the immediate needs on the ground. And I think the two go hand in hand. I do want to end on an optimistic note. For the first time, Shanika, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing those acts of solidarity. I'm seeing those bonds, spontaneous, not engineered, not performative, spontaneous. And I would like to believe that for an individual who's quite jaded and cynical, to see these things is an indication that they will endure and continue. One never knows, but I never thought I'll see them. And it's genuine and it's widespread. So,
absolutely.
It does speak to a moment, I think.
And I think, Sanjana, as for Kiwis, for Sri Lankan Kiwis here in New Zealand and around the world, I think some of the ways we can help is to keep encouraging them, keep keep their hopes up. Say, look, you're doing great, and keep moving. We're behind you, right behind you, and we have a responsibility to tell New Zealand government, or if all the rest of the places that Sinhalese people are or Sri Lankans are, we need to pressure Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan government, to ask them, please listen to the people's mandate and respect it. And we need to keep pushing. It's the least we can do.
I agree. And on that note, Shanika, thanks very much for joining me to talk through some really complicated and complex issues. And I'm sure that you and I both join in supporting the people's protest, supporting their clarion call, and also wishing for a more democratic, peaceful, and just home.
Thank you, Sanjana.
Thank you.